Good afternoon. Excellent. Trying to see if we can get everybody re-engaged here. So I'm Jorge Benitez, and I'm the Chief Executive for Accenture in North America. I'm also privileged to serve on the board of Change the Equation. And I'm really delighted to introduce our next speaker today, who I think has a really unique set of experiences and insights that are really true to our mission at Change the Equation. You see, at Change the Equation, we're really at the intersection of business and education. And what we're really trying to do is ensure that all young people are really STEM literate. And so I think Dr. Alan Grossman, who's a senior fellow and retired professor of practice at Harvard Business School, he's done some extensive work in business engagement and in public education, and we're actually collaborating with him and some of his peers in doing some original research aimed at trying to drive greater U.S. competitiveness. We've got a number of things, and I think you'll talk about this, that are very strong points in terms of what we can offer folks in the U.S., but we've got some areas that we need to work on. Now, Dr. Grossman is an authority on high-performance management of school districts and nonprofits, and the lessons that charitable foundations can learn from venture capitalists. I think he has a very rare combination of skills working both in terms of the business side as well as nonprofit, and he'll share that with us. Before joining Harvard in 1998, he was the CEO of Outward Bound, and previously served as regional chief executive and chairman of a number of other companies. Dr. Grossman is going to engage us today in a conversation about how businesses can move beyond small local victories to create the kinds of large-scale national changes that we so desperately need. This discussion lies at the heart, again, of what we're trying to do at Change the Equation, which is really to focus our actions that will have the biggest impact on the future of our young people and thereby increase our nation's prosperity. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Grossman.
Thank you. So let me start off by telling you I received a phone call from Klaus saying, would you like a confidence monitor? Does everyone know what a confidence monitor is? So when you do a PowerPoint, you know which one of your slides are coming up. And I said, are the screens visible? He said, yeah, no problem. As I was sitting here, I realized these screens aren't visible. Certainly not from here. When I asked Klaus about this, he said, oh, the vice president. He said, they made us move the screens. So I'm not sure if Klaus is blaming every glitch on the vice president. Are you Republican or Democrat, Klaus? So he won't say. OK. So I'll apologize in advance, though I hopefully know my material. I will have to look at the slides because otherwise I'll be so distracted trying to remember what comes next. So my apologies in advance. What Jorge referred to is this competitiveness project. About 2.5 years ago, we at Harvard Business School with colleagues started to ask the question, are we as a country competitive, or is the myth that we're not competitive? What is it about this whole conversation? What do we know? What's conjecture? What don't we know? And could we do a little research to find out? And the first thing we found out is that there wasn't a common definition. So when you say to yourself, what's competitive? We started off developing a definition for competitiveness. Now, I want to point something out that I think sets us apart from other definitions. It isn't just about whether companies can compete. It's whether or not companies can compete and maintain higher and better wages for the bulk of Americans. Now, one way to compete is to reduce your costs. Press them down. Be the lowest cost provider. We would say that's not sustainable. And today in the New York Times, there was an article about how China, the low-cost producer, is shipping massive a number of jobs to Africa and other countries because the labor there is now cheaper than in China. So from our perspective, it's not just about whether corporations can compete. And by the way, most of our corporations, particularly the large ones, are doing just fine. So are the MBAs. So are the graduate degree students. Who's not? We all know the answer to that. It's that vast group in the middle. They're not doing well. And if you want evidence, some people say, well, you know, the reason we have a competitive crisis is because of the recession. We're going to argue that. We're going to say we don't have a problem based on the recession. We have a structural problem in the United States that if you look at job creation, you will see that from about 1975 to 2001, we had a 2.1% annual growth in jobs. If you look at 2001, which was, I believe, a recession as well, look what's happened. Now, it's come back a bit, but we would argue that it won't come back the way it was if we do business as usual. Now, what has to change? Well, key is what you're all here to talk about, and I applaud the work that you're doing. It's about education. A lot of people talk about the link between being competitive as a country and as a business and our public education system. But actually, we haven't made a good enough case. We haven't connected the lines between competitiveness and public education. When you look at the amount of employment, when you look at the educational attainment and the average wage, you start to see something pretty striking. Now, you may have known this, but high school educated young people are unemployed at a rate of about twice as college. If you are without a high school degree, the unemployment rate is somewhere around 3 times, around 11%. And since we all know that competitiveness is based on having the right people in our workforce, having the people with the right skills, we can see that we are not on a very good trajectory to change that curve in terms of job creation. So in our project, what we did was we went out and started with business leaders, and we surveyed them, and we asked them, so what are the key elements that you deal with that makes your organization competitive or not? And we gave them these 4 quadrants, from strengthening and improving to weakening and deteriorating. You probably won't be too surprised about the answers. You notice what's up in that quadrant up here, the elements you would expect. Look what's at the bottom. Public education only, I don't want to say exceeded by, but beat out by the political system, and we all know, and I happen to agree with that, no matter where you want to place public education, political system deserves to be at the bottom. I'm happy to say that in Washington, D.C. But when you look at that, this is the perception of 12,000 of our graduates, most of whom are business leaders, or financial leaders, or government leaders, or even nonprofit leaders. The problem that we're facing is not just about, when you think about competitiveness, we are making glacially slow progress in improving our students' critical thinking skills, whether it's math, literacy, science. Here's the rub. When you look at what other countries are doing, this is, to me, a very fascinating bit of information. So if you look at this old demographic, rarely I like to be in the old demographic, but this is a good one. We actually have a very significant advantage over most other countries. When you look at the age cohorts getting younger we have an increasing disadvantage. What does that mean? Well, it means they're improving much more rapidly than we are. So we can't pat ourselves on the back and say, you know, we're doing a good job because look at our improvement, when the people out there from other countries are doing so much better than we are. Now, when you look at this, and this, actually this next slide, I should preface it because I said to Judy, who asked a question from the floor, or stated that we need to spend more money. Maybe we do. I don't want to argue that point. There are districts in America that don't spend enough money. Reality, in the last 30 years, we are spending 100% more money on public education than we did 30 years ago, in real dollars. And if you look at where we are as a country, you can see that the United States is almost at the very top, and there are many, many countries that are doing better than us, spending less. So I don't mean to say that we don't, in some cases, need more money, but I come from Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's where I live. I don't come from there, but I live there. In Cambridge, we're spending $24,000 per pupil. Terrible results. In Long Beach, California, where they're suffering from all the cutbacks, in Denver, Colorado, where they've suffered from the cutbacks, and I think they rank 47th or 48th in spending. These are districts that are actually doing well by urban district standards. So it surfaced in our panel. We do have an issue, maybe related somewhat to money, but I would contest that a lot of it has to do with how we are spending our money. And I work with a number of urban districts. And I will tell you, and we'll get to that in a little bit later, that the difference for most of them, above a certain baseline, is not how much they're spending per pupil, it's how well they're spending their money. And we'll talk a bit about that as we go on. So, what we did was, in the face of this information that we got from business leaders, and our whole purpose of this project is to create action-oriented projects that will actually address some of those issues that are in that lower quadrant we looked at. One of the first things we looked at was public education. We've been active in it. We have programs for management in urban education. We said maybe we could make a difference if we accept the hypothesis that actually business could make a difference. Now, I know you had a vote earlier today, and some people said business is making a difference, and I don't want to get into that debate. I'll show you some data. But we interviewed about, or we surveyed and received responses from about 1,200 urban superintendents, not just urban, ranged anywhere from 10 schools to districts with 200,000 students. And we asked them a series of questions about business engagement. Interestingly, we couldn't find any data that had been done before this. So a lot of the stories we hear, a lot of our ideas are conjecture. And we wanted to substantiate it the way we wanted to about business perception in public education. And what animated it was basically three questions. What are you currently doing, businesses, today? Not just in STEM, but in general. How are you engaged in public education for those of you who are from business? How effective are these engagements? Expecting a raft of data so we could discriminate among various interventions to decide which may be more effective than others. And what does it take? A conversation you began this morning, and I know you're focused on. What does it take for business to be an effective partner with public education? And what we found time and again, that idea of partnership, one, without it, business can't make a difference. With it, we have a chance. But creating partnerships, which we're going to talk about in a bit, and you started to talk about, that's a real challenge. Now, I would argue that one of the fundamental reasons it's such a big challenge is about the chasm of understanding between business leaders and nonprofits. And public education. And we set out to understand, was that conjecture or was that reality? And so here's what we found out. Superintendents actually like and want business leaders engaged. And they think that they want to be engaged. But they also believe that the way to get business leaders engaged, and it was talked about this morning, is to connect the improvement in education with workforce development. It's not that business leaders don't believe in the equity issue, and I did this presentation once to a group of educators, and someone said, "What is this? Why are you so instrumental? This is really just an equity issue." Well, it is an equity issue. But equity is tied to income, and income is tied to education. So for me, it's not a debate about whether this is instrumental and we're trying to create people who are just good workers. It goes to the heart of what this country stands for, providing people with opportunity for them to earn a living. That's competitiveness from our perspective. And then we wanted to know, are they involved? And what we discovered was, yes, they are involved. And if you look at all districts, they actually had quite a bit of business involvement. But this was really interesting. When you look at the involvement, it was fragmented and tended to be one-off. So if you look at this green, these are one-off kind of efforts. If you look at the ones they say not part of a larger statewide or national program, you see that most of the engagement in the 1,200 districts that we got responses from, you'll see that they were mostly local. They tended not to be part of a state or national effort. I know most of you think about state and national, but this has significant implications because what it indicated and what we heard was that well-intended, highly fragmented, not necessarily effective engagements, and that it took this idea that they should be part of a state or national effort. So district leaders perceived that if it was part of some bigger effort, it was going to be more effective. Now, this was perception. I'm sorry, I said business. Education leaders felt that if it was part of a bigger effort, then it would be more effective. What was particularly fascinating is, guess what? They really don't know. So about 85% of the superintendents said we don't really measure effectiveness of business involved with public schools. Think about that. You know, one of the things that we in business take such great pride in is we make decisions based on data. We interviewed dozens of CEOs. I said, how do you know what you're doing is working? Well, we know. Well, how? Well, we visit the sites. I mean, I come from the business world. I live in the business world, so I don't mean to be demeaning my business colleagues in any way. But they would not invest their money in a project without knowing the ROI and the ROE and every data point. And yet, almost $4 billion a year is spent on education philanthropy by business, and they know very little about its impact. So rather than, piling on, I would suggest that this is a real area of opportunity, because the rhetoric from the business community is, we are tired of giving away our money, of giving away our resources without knowing if we're effective. But the effort to date of the business community in actually determining effectiveness has been very little, which puts all of you in just a terrific position to hold these men and women accountable to put their money where their rhetoric is. So, opportunity. What was very interesting in terms of shifting to how to create these partnerships, keeping in mind two fundamental premises that one, business can make a difference. Two, it can only make a difference if there's partnerships. And you start off with looking at some of the key elements in making a partnership. And I would point to the perception. So business leaders, 35% said they were well informed. Look at the green slice from superintendents. It's only a difference of about 25 times in terms of perceptions as to whether or not business is well informed about public education. Remember that scatter diagram I showed you about where business leaders think education is in terms of a competitive element? Well, we asked the same set of questions to superintendents. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to their answer? So superintendents believed that public education was just about in that top quadrant of strong and improving as an element for competitiveness. Talk about a wide divide. How do you create partnerships when you're starting off from a fundamentally different position? The system is broken. No, wait a second. The system isn't broken. It's doing just fine. Now, the way I sort of was critical about the absence of data from CEOs when they make decisions, when we ask people, what supports this? We're working hard, we know it, we have a tough job, etc. There was very little data. So we have two groups talking to each other, very different perceptions, both speaking an uncommon or dissonant language to each other. But here was the good news. Most superintendents, despite this divide, want businesses to engage not only more than they are, but in different ways. And the ways that they're looking for, they're tired of the business coming to them and say, we want to give you, 20 or 50 or 100 mentors to come into your school. Well, here's our computers that we don't use anymore. They're tired of that. They're fighting a battle. And by the way, being a superintendent, we have a program, and I work with superintendents. This is a hard job. I would say being an urban superintendent in America today is the most difficult management job there is in America. I've run a public company. I've run a nonprofit. It's relatively light lifting. Don't get me wrong. It's hard work, but you know the rules. You know the stakeholders, and you know pretty much what they want and need to be satisfied. When you get involved in public education, you're entering a political world that is unmatched. You don't know if you're going to wake up almost every day on the front page of the local newspaper for doing things that really have nothing to do with your end result. So it's good news, and that there's a receptivity on the side of superintendents for more engagement. But here's some of the things they said to us, and we extracted that from the 1,200, but they're highly representative. They're highly representative of what they believe. You know, that stop your whining and be part of the solution. Don't go to the newspapers and tell them you're not supplying us with the kind of people that we need. Come to us. Try and sit down and talk as a starting point rather than setting up this oppositional kind of relationship. Well, you know, it's never, so I've painted this picture, created a challenge, and that's not good enough from our perspective as to what a project should look like. So the next part of our project is, so what do you do about it? What do you do about getting business engaged more effectively? How do we kind of get over that divide in a way that creates strong, vibrant, trusting, because clearly there's not a lot of trust there. And without trust, you don't have partnerships. As one organization said, our partnerships only advance at the speed of trust. So first item that you have to work on, that we all have to work on, is trust. But again, that's not good enough, because what we said to business leaders is, look, a lot of what you're doing isn't making a difference to the best we can tell. Tens of billions of dollars invested, millions of man or human hours invested. So what do we do? Well, what we did was we decided on 3 core, what we call plays. And we got some pushback. What do you mean plays? It sounds like football. And we couldn't come up with it. Say approaches to engagement, if you like that better. But we actually wrote a playbook. So the first, and one that you all do here in Change the Equation, is policy. Very important, but policy done in a strategic, carefully aligned way. The second, which we were talking about, is scaling what works. You know, and we don't do that well in public education. We really have a gap between discovering what actually works and scaling. And whatever your definition of scale, going to 10 schools in 10 districts is not scale. Not if we're looking for transformational change. That's a sort of nice to do, but not the kind of impact that we need to ultimately make a difference. So just to go into these 3 areas, we looked at laying the policy foundations for innovation, because we think that this policy has to be connected to the kind of outcomes, creativity, and innovation that we talked about. And by the way, business has done a fabulous job, not just with Common Core. In reality, Achieve started in 1980 something or other and I'm looking at Keith because he brought up Achieve, without the business community and Achieve, we would not have accountability and standards. It's that simple. They were the one, whether you like or hate No Child Left Behind. It was because of that cross-sector partnership with the governors, the nonprofit sector, that began the conversation around accountability. Flawed legislation, for sure. But I was in a district in Texas, and I said, when did you start thinking about outcomes rather than inputs as a way to measure your success? And then I paused and I said, but I want to be impertinent here. How did you measure your success before? Big district, by the way, 70, 80,000 students. And she said, you know, before No Child Left Behind, we really didn't know what business we were in. I said, well, what business did you think you were in? She said, well, if the football team won, and this is a smart woman, if we sent a half a dozen kids to some of the major universities, we could declare victory. That was enough. She said, No Child Left Behind was the game changer that forced us to ask a different set of questions, and I would argue is the platform from which we are all building upon. And if you think that what I'm saying is because I'm a George Bush Republican, it's not the case. But credit where credit is due. And what are the characteristics? I'll let you read them for yourself. But there has to be a willingness to stake out a position. And what you've seen around Common Core, understandably, are CEOs who have gotten really freaked by the pushback, who have just stopped the communication. And for it to be successful, we need the kind of staying power. We need the kind of guts that it takes. It's Jeb Bush at Grumman Northrop. He's very outspoken about where he's going to locate a plant. He's very outspoken about the need to have well-developed workers, and he sees the connection between that and Common Core. There are some remarkable business leaders. And the Business Roundtable and other business groups, they're for it. And it's not just at a national level. What we discovered in Denver was that because the business community in a city and a state that is very anti-tax got behind a $500 million bond issue to improve the schools, it passed. And if you talk to the powers that be in Denver, they said it never would have without the kind of partnership that we established. Second area, this scaling. It's what you all think about, it's what you all work on, it's what you're all focused on. In order to scale, there are elements, and you could probably add as to what are the essential elements that you need to scale. And not coincidentally, I picked out a couple of really successful or about to be successful STEM projects that are scaling. But someone said earlier on, we've been around a long time in this effort, and yet what kind of results do we have? Not the kind that we all aspire to. And part of it is scaling is complex. And I spent a lot of time, because a lot of this is analogous to the nonprofit sector, you don't have the equity capital, you don't have the mechanisms for scaling that exists in the business world in many of these nonprofits / public education. And that's where the business community, that's what they do, that's what they think about, that's where they live. If we can cross the divide so that educators think they're sitting next to them, speaking the same language, understanding the same issues, and really working together for scale. But here's the final area, and I would say that if we don't do this, your efforts are going to be, the impact of them are going to be reduced dramatically. And that is, we've got to change the ecosystem. Your programs, you train the best teachers in the world for STEM, and they go into a dysfunctional district where they feel their accomplishments are not only not rewarded, but they're identified as show-offs. I've heard that time and again. Think of any company that's successful, and then imagine, because all success at the end of the day is about is human capital. Is that a fair statement? If you don't have the human capital, you need other things. But if you don't have the human capital, you're never going to be a success. School districts in America, for the most part, are not well run, particularly urban districts. I won't talk about suburban, particularly urban districts. But here's the good news. These are people who don't come out of their worlds with backgrounds. And how do you build this complex system in a way that is going to support all students and drive towards a common set of outcomes? This conversation is only about a decade old. When we started something up at Harvard Business School called the Public Education Leadership Project, we decided that we'd look at whether or not we could make a difference, not knowing anything about content, but focusing in on management, organization, leadership, and using a district as the key unit that we were going to work with. A lot of people work on schools, and every district that I know of has some great schools in a lousy district. Every single district. But can you identify an urban district in America that has a great system of schools, which basically means you have outstanding principals swimming against the tide when they're good schools, and often when those schools, when the principal leaves, the school goes down. So to ensure your sustainability of the programs that you're doing, of your success, you need to also support this idea of transforming the education ecosystem, the district. And you heard Stan refer to that, because he's lived in it. And we have a lot of dysfunctionality in terms of the way we're structured. 700 districts in New York State, 15,000 districts in America today, all doing their own thing, their own way, with redundancy. Forget about efficiency. And there's a lot of redundancy of cost, but effectiveness. So your work is not just about STEM. Your work is about encouraging the people in your company, thinking about how do we transform the system so that the STEM projects live on way beyond what we're doing today, and expand because they have a hospitable environment in which to expand. And there are a couple of really exciting initiatives. You know, one is the Strive Together that you may be aware of. And someone on the panel talked about aligning around a common set of metrics, decision-making driven by data, collaboration across sectors, and among, you know, someone also mentioned businesses are, in general, no one in this room, they're lousy collaborators with other businesses. It's very hard to get them to mobilize and work together. A lot of smiles, a lot of course, and they go off and do their own thing for a variety of reasons. But unless we have the frank and open conversation of what it's going to take to actually transform, with business being serious about being at the table, about being serious partners, I don't think we're ever going to succeed of really transforming the system. So, You might think, after saying all this, boy, this guy's depressing. I'm actually very optimistic. 10 years ago, we could not identify an urban district in America that was making measurable progress along a set of metrics, indices like graduation rates, violence, not just test scores. We could not identify a single one. I could identify 15 of them today, and I don't know all of them. We are making progress. They are becoming centers, the better run ones, of innovation. They are experimenting, and you may have already experienced going into an urban or the district that you want to work in and finding a very open, receptive environment. Technology is making a difference. They are really experimenting. Sure, we have a lot of errors, but everyone thought, well, we just put a computer in every room and that'll solve the problem. But we're learning. So this system that has been around for a couple of hundred years, designed to be a production line to create an environment where immigrants could go out, become citizens, which was the basic original purpose, we're now have to transform to become productive workers of, quote, the 21st century. And this effort is actually pretty new. So I am encouraged. The number of nonprofits has gone up exponentially from where it was just 10 years ago. They're pushing the envelope. The quality of the leadership in this field is really improving. I don't feel that most businesses know that. Maybe the ones in the room do. But I speak to dozens, if not hundreds of business leaders. They're ready to give up. They roll their eyes, and understandably, and they're frustrated. And yet we have a lot of good news, including the work that many of you are doing, to tell them. So, to close, this is what we think. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but this is what we think we need to get from business leaders. And there are a few who, when you talk about sustained commitment, you can cite a Keith Barrett who's been in this for how long, Keith? 3 years. Oh, 30, I got it. 30 years. 30 years. And, you find some isolated individuals, you find some companies like Accenture, and Jorge's predecessor works with us as well, Bill Green. He's been just dogged. But what is it going to take? I want to stop for a moment, or stop and ask you, I want to look at the time here, what would it take to achieve some of these objectives? Many of you work in businesses. Many of you understand the dynamics that are going on. Before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to each of your tables to work on that and hold you accountable. You just can't sit here, nod your head, roll your eyes, and then leave, right? You got to have accountability here. We need ideas as to what to do. We do, because we are committed to trying to improve businesses' engagement in public education. And we have a pretty good platform and a pretty good brand that we think we can make a difference, but we need to work in partnership with you. Before we do that, we have a little time. Does anyone have some questions, comments, pushback, annoyance? Is this annoyance? Okay, questions are good. I didn't mean annoyance, really. Now, pushback, go ahead.
Oh, great. So my question was, you showed this graph, that was a circle graph about measuring student outcomes with some of these interventions, and most of them didn't measure. But I was wondering if you also asked the question using a different metric, because I do PD, And I know that with the PD that I do is content-based in mathematics, so that doesn't show up in student outcomes for years because we invest in teachers' mathematical knowledge. It takes them a while to marinate, turn that into their lessons. So I feel like the way that and one of my maybe frustrations is the right word, challenges, I think, coming from education and working with business sector, is business wants microwave outcomes. You guys want it done yesterday, right? And working in education, I think of education as a 13-year long game. I think of a kindergartner all the way through 12th grade. And at the end of my 80-hour PD, the students aren't going to have those outcomes. So I was just curious if you asked other questions that maybe there were measurements or different metrics to be used.
Well, we didn't, and notice we said, have you evaluated the studies? We didn't say, did it result in improved student outcomes? What we said was, do you have any indication as to whether or not you're effective at all? Now, my guess is that in your program, so tell us about it. What do you do? What do you do? So you don't know if you can attach what you do to educational outcomes, but do you know if you're successful at all?
Yeah, we do. I was trapped behind the podium. Klaus couldn't see me. I was raising my hand earlier when we were talking about public-private partnerships. I actually manage the Intel Math program, which is a national K-8 teacher professional development. And like I said, we work with higher ed, with mathematicians to teach teachers math content, not how to teach math, not make and take stuff, but literally like, let's delve into the math so you know it better. So that's not something that shows up at the end of our course, but we've been working with districts like, for example, Chandler in Arizona, and we can see over the course that, and again, over the course of years, that their student outcomes are starting to creep up because of multi-year, moving with the district each year, running another cohort of teachers. But it's not, I think the challenge for us, at least on the education side, is we think of it from a research perspective. So to look at student outcomes for research, we're actually right now working with IES, federal program, $8 million to test student outcomes, right? And so that's very expensive, and there aren't a lot of foundations that want to put up that money to check the outcomes from a research perspective.
So it's I would be loath to say that we should try and connect the dots between what we do and the ultimate educational outcome. However, the threshold and the bar was much, much lower. It's, do you know? And do you have any data to support whether or not your programs are accomplishing what you want them to accomplish at the particular stage at your intervention? So we set the bar so low that we expected it. In terms of businesses and their demands, of course business people are going to say, we want the highest level of measurement. What businessman or woman wouldn't say that? What that indicates, though, is part of that lack of understanding that we showed you. When you have the conversation, many of which I've had, and explain why you can't connect this effort with the ultimate outcome in graduation 12 or 6 or 8 years later of a student, but understand why it's a progression, a complex system, an integrated system that requires multiple interventions, my experience is they get it. They get it. And they get it more than if you say the counterpoint is, we don't know, and it's okay. Yes? You want to get a mic?
So this is just a little bit of maybe connecting the dots with what you're talking about with Intel Math, is that I actually feel like there's like a whole nother circle of people, which is the research community, that doesn't show up on anybody's radar, because there are existing valid and reliable measures that indicate, student interest, teacher interest, student likelihood to pursue STEM, teachers' overall understanding of the nature of science. But the superintendents sure don't know about those tools, and the business people, why would they know about education research tools? And I think that that's like this whole, if you asked any one of the people who you were working with, have you connected with the research community, I would say the answer would probably be 100% no, pretty much. And I think that's another piece of this. So as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, well, the National Association for Research and Science Teaching, NARST, are you guys working with them? Because as they're implementing STEM inclusive schools research, are they also working on the business? I think that there's that piece there, because you're right that evaluation is really expensive, but there are tools out there, and you can't just say for every intervention, design your own metric, because then we just get a whole bunch of Survey Monkey junk. You know, did you have a good time? Would you come back? So I think that that research piece is a piece that I would love to see more about.
And
that.
maybe the Department of Education, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Sure.
But you could certainly help and be an arbiter in their calling the conference so that people aren't going off in a multitude of directions, not to impose it, but to at least say, what are some good standards that you might use?
Right. So the What Works Clearinghouse is attempting to do some of that.
Yeah. Change the equation. There you go.
I mean, and
Why am I not surprised that Linda put in a plug?
And I think that IES and NSF and between AAAS and NRC and all these other people, but the problem is that people who say, oh, there's such great tools out there, and I look at them and I say, could you just tell me the tool? Just give me the tool, and then I'll give it to the people who are running the programs. I think that
But that's part of
our
the
role.
issue here,
Yep.
because the world is so fragmented, because there's this kind of, often egos are wrapped up in it, that my way is the way. That's why this is a long-term process. We need to start this communication in just the way you're saying. Connect people, let them be confident that there are ways of measuring. Craig?
To further complicate your analysis, I think there's a group that is well defined, but you haven't touched on today, that plays in this game. And that group is the president of every one of the major universities in the United States and all the way down to the junior colleges. We heard earlier today that if a kid is not well prepared in high school and goes to junior college or a four-year institution and they have to be remediated, chances of graduation go down dramatically. In the business world, you have suppliers and buyers or customers. The customer says, this is a specification by which I want to buy something. The universities have been, I think, derelict in setting the specification, incoming specification to their institution, or the outgoing specification from the K-12 system. And it always amazes me why that group, who have to spend dollars remediating unless the state says you can't spend dollars remediating, then the kid gets lost. But if they do remediate, they spend time, energy, effort redoing K-12 education, as opposed to getting involved in K-12 education and make sure the product that comes out the door of K-12 is satisfactory to go into grade 13, 14, so forth. You haven't mentioned them. A bunch of us have spent energy and years talking to them and tried to get them involved. They have almost uniformly resisted.
Important point. And they've resisted because they've been able to resist. Because maybe we haven't put the right amount of pressure from the right sources to allow them to resist. I want you to take the next 7 or 8 minutes, because I'm assigning you, I need good ideas, okay? What do we do, and how do we do it to up the commitment and the engagement of businesses? This isn't something that is incidental to your work. I would argue this is core to your work. You can be proud of the fact that your company is involved. But if you look at the total number, we haven't even scratched the surface. So what do we do? What can you do to really up the involvement of businesses? Take 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll hear what you have to say. So, Who wants to be bold? Who has an idea? Who has an idea that, I won't say, we'll set the bar. It doesn't have to be fantastic. You don't have to believe it's fantastic, but you think it's good. Does anyone have a good idea? Yes. And this is not just what, but how you're going to do it. Would you also introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, my name is Tiara Booker DeWire. I'm with the Maryland Business Roundtable. And what we've done and what we have found works in Maryland is that we bring our business leaders together. We start at the superintendent level, and we work at elbow with the superintendents. Then we take it to the coordinator level in the central offices. Then we take it to the teacher level. So we really take a sustained commitment and that at elbow assistance between the business community and the school system so that we're speaking the same language. We go over the data that needs to be collected. We work with the State Department of Education, and we're the only business organization that has a portal on their longitudinal data system so we can actually see the impact that our programs are having in schools. So it takes a deep commitment and a lot of time and a lot of partnership, but you have to have that authentic partnership for anything to work.
Are you getting pushback at any level?
No, we didn't, because we really worked with the superintendents to make sure that they understood what was going on. And we didn't go into any district or didn't go into any school that didn't want us there. Luckily, they all wanted us there. And we've spent years building these relationships, really since the 90s. And even as superintendents change and as staff change, we have been able to sustain our partnerships with the schools.
And once that trust is in place, you get kind of a viral effect as to what's going on. Yes. We have one on the left here, and then we'll do the right, and then we'll do you next.
So I'm a little bit of an imposter to the conversation because I'm coming from the research community. But what we talked about here, or one thought that I had was that you mentioned return on investment and the way businesses make decisions, and you showed the data. And it seems to me that for too many years, businesses put education as a donation. It's not an investment. So if you can put that as part of your strategic plan, that you have certain measurable goals and objectives that you need to meet that is going to give you a return on your investment and bring money in, but it's around human capital, it's around outreach. So it's not I'm giving these computers or I'm giving a donation to education or education is important. It is part of the strategic plan of the business.
I'm so glad you said that because that's why we connected it to what is competitiveness. You know, to make it a self-interest. I'm not saying that you always have to be driven by self-interest, but when you're driven by an interest that connects to what you're doing every day, that's a pretty powerful way. We have one more on this side.
My name is Kirsten Daler, and I direct the Making Sense of Science project at WestEd. And we had an interesting conversation at our table here, thinking about a couple of key parts. One is people are more likely to play in the sandbox if they feel like there's a clear vision of where we're going. And so some business partners are willing to be at the table as part of the strategic planning and have the interest and the investment and time to help create that strategic plan. But other folks would like to have a part at the table and are willing to participate, but they don't know what their role can be. And so when we think about how businesses, let's say you're a small business in rural Arizona or New Mexico or Colorado, and you'd like to participate, but you are a small business. So to be able to have somebody at the table for strategic planning in large investment is not realistic. And yet at the same time, if you are wanting to invest in your children's teachers and invest in human capital, you might be able to have the school leaders write you a letter and say, look, we have a plan. We have a program. The program has results, and we're asking you to sponsor some teachers to come. And that way you can make an investment in your community. We found a niche for you. Does that work for you? So those are some success stories that we were telling around our table, from the sort of big investment to smaller investments, but ways to have many different folks participate in the process.
And that's so important because any success in a system will be made up of multiple programs. And if you have a plan and you're talking a common language and a common set of objectives, something collective impact is starting to do, which I'm very excited about. You can get to the people, they don't have to work at the meta level. And often large corporations want to participate, you know, at that strategy level, Six Sigma, we'll bring in, and that's great stuff. But there are tons of small and medium-sized businesses. And by the way, when they asked, there's a debate around whether or not people can fill, whether or not we have a gap in terms of job-ready people. Go out and talk to the people who run your car repair shop. Go out and talk to the people who have a lathe shop. All of this is computer-driven now. There's not a one that I have spoken with who says that he or she can get the workers they need, enough of them. So if that's not a competitiveness issue, I don't know what is. We have time for one more. Yes.
Deepa Gupta, and I'm with the Boeing Company.
Hi.
Hi. We had a pretty interesting discussion at our table about patient capital versus the short-term returns, some of the comments that were made before. We've talked a lot about human capital today, and I'd like to just put something on the table that I think is happening with a lot of larger companies that might be represented in the room, and that is to structure public-private partnerships in a way that is both creating roles for all of those partners at the table, as well as creating measurable impact over a longer time frame than perhaps business is used to. There's a human capital issue in our own houses on the corporate side if we're really serious about investing in birth through grade 12 and post-secondary education for individuals who understand the circumstances and therefore can have the trusting relationships with the practitioners in education who are expert at their jobs in educating and preparing our students. So I think that there's a human capital issue on our own sides and thinking about how much we're willing to invest in our own staff and the skills of that staff to do this work on behalf of our institutions. And then the point on the universities that was made earlier, I thought this was going to go that way, but it didn't, and that was around the point of a big elephant in the room, which is how universities are preparing our educators and the discussion around that human capital and the core of it, especially when you look at the percentage of our teaching workforce that's going to turn over. And programs like You Teach obviously are addressing this, but that's one program. And so that's another part of this from a human capital issue. If you take the premise of human capital being at the make or break for success in any of our institutions, public, private, or nonprofit, those two issues to me are really critical in this discussion.
And notice how these suggestions kind of connect, right? We heard about how in Maryland they're really trying to dig down, communicate, how we need to communicate internally. You know, we make assumptions in our own companies because people do care that they're not part of that gap of understanding. And they do care, and they want to get involved. But we don't take the time to develop that internal human capital that you need to do in your own organizations. So, thank you for these suggestions. I know, and I feel deprived of the fact that I am not able to capture them all. So I would invite you to email me your suggestions. Not kidding, because some of these ideas are really terrific, and we can actually help mobilize business leaders to get this done. And I just would say in closing that I get inspired. One of the other reasons I feel optimistic, and I'm not just saying this, is because of people like you in the room. You care, and you will make a difference. You're going to get frustrated, as you all know. But if we keep the effort up, if we really bring our corporate leaders, both from large and small businesses, into this, we're going to solve this problem. We are going to stay and become a more competitive country, and at its root, at its base, we're going to educate our young people in this country much more effectively than we are today. So keep it up. Terrific. Thank you very much.